Welcome back to Miller's Movers episode 6. An absolute ton to get through this weekend, so we'll get straight into it, starting with the weekend's action, or the long weekend's action, from Cheltenham and then Navan in Ireland. Cheltenham on Friday, undoubtedly the star on the show was John Bonham. He won the Schlur Chase second year in a row. He certainly wasn't as impressive as he was the year before, but I felt walking around the paddock, he certainly looked bigger than I'd seen him look before. I felt the conservative nature Nico de Boinville rode him through the race, whereas last year he was very aggressive and got them at it from a long way out. Here he was all the time looking to conserve energy. I liked how John Bon got down and battled up the hill. Yes, the bare form suggests that he's got a bit too fine, but I think physically he will. And I just liked how he went through it. More importantly, I think it highlights how important Nico de Boinville is for John Bon's jumping. In an interview afterwards, he referenced that he didn't want to go into the complexities of the balance between being brave and being cautious with John Bon with his jumping. And I was shouting at my TV, urging him to go into those complexities, because I think that's a key part that perhaps racing doesn't always get across, that it's not just a simple point and shoot exercise with jumping. And fine rider though James Bowen is, it was pretty apparent last year that when he got on John Bon, he wasn't perhaps able to thread that very fine line between being brave and being cautious with John Bon, and he didn't jump as well in the Clarence House under James Bowen. Nico de Boinville is clearly a very important factor to this horse, and I think going forward he'll sweep all before him in the UK this year in the 2 mile division. Quite whether he can cope with the Irish platoon that will come over remains to be seen, but he's a very fine horse. He perhaps doesn't get the respect he deserves because he is Douvan's little brother. He's an established star. Perhaps the young rising star is Potter's Charm. He won the graded novice hurdle, jumped far better than he had in the October meeting, went a gear quicker, seemed to improve his jumping for that, and he travelled very well throughout, showed plenty of speed, was able to pick up Valgrand very comfortably up the home straight. Now, you remember Valgrand won the grade 2 at the October meeting, probably quite a cheap grade 2. I said at the time that much like his trainer Dan Skelton, I'd want to see him go and do it again before getting too carried away, because he won pulling a cart on that occasion. I'm not sure that he perhaps delivered the same performance here. They were trying to stretch him out in trip. Maybe that was part of it, but also maybe the fact that he was on a fairly quick turnaround of 28 days means that he's a better horse fresh. That win at Cheltenham October came off a 150-day layoff. Could just be he's a better horse fresh. Wouldn't be at all surprised if he was put away now by the Skeltons and brought back for the spring. Wouldn't lose face with Valgrand just yet. I think he's undoubtedly a handicapper. He's perhaps not up to graded level, but just would be a little bit cautious about the form with Potter's Charm. I don't think you want to take it literally that he beat at his best Valgrand, and you can throw Gail Marler into that. She closed the distance that she was beaten in October by Valgrand by 10 lengths. It was only 8 lengths on Friday. I think that means Valgrand's not quite run to his previous level, and that then means that perhaps Potter's Charm, his form needs to be taken into consideration too. He'll likely go on to the Challow now, and I think that'll be a far more informative race. On Saturday, East India Dock kicked off the meeting with a really big performance in the Triumph Hurdle trial. I say trial in inverted commas there. I'd be surprised if any of these, including the winner, are able to shake up the field in the Triumph Hurdle, but he was very dominant through this. He jumped far better than he had when winning at Wincanton on his hurdle debut. He's a 2 mile stayer on the flat with decent form, so he was never going to struggle for stamina up the hill. And the fact he was able to travel so well meant that he could be called the winner at pretty much any stage of the race. I wouldn't be at all surprised to see him go unbeaten through his season up until the Triumph Hurdle. As long as they keep him away from a sharp track, there's a couple of decent juvenile contests around Kempton. That might not be his sort of cup of tea, but back at Cheltenham, I suspect in December or January, he'll take all the beating. But whether he can cope with what's undoubtedly going to be a strong Irish challenge in the juvenile division, as it has been for the last few years, remains to be seen. But then the horse that really caught my eye, and I went against him and I was wrong. Tom Collins put him up in the SPK betting podcast and got it bang right. Loaded. He went off odds on, but he won, as you want to see an odds on shot win. He won very comfortably. He coped with this more lively ground. He jumped very efficiently. He made one mistake on his chase debut at Stratford, but he made no sort of mistake here at all. He jumped quite low. He jumped quite quick. He's clearly got gears. He's got plenty of experience as well coming into the novice chase ranks. That's probably a bonus. He ran in some competitive handicap hurdles last year. He was second in the Betfair hurdle, second in the county. He's transferred that form and then a bit more, I think, across into chasing. And whilst he's going to face stiffer tests yet, you can't help but like what he's done so far. And then on to Sunday, And a horse I really like is Peaky Boy. I thought he was really brave going down the inner in the 2 mile 4 handicap chase under Nico de Boinville. His jumping kept him in it. Nico asked him for some pretty big efforts at a number of fences, and he responded every time. Was looked tap for toe the whole way, never really travelled completely on the bridle, but got to the top of the hill, coasted down, and then stayed really strongly from 2 out to the last, and then from the last up the hill. I think he's a 3 mile chaser in the making. I think he's quite classy to be able to do that on just his 3rd start over obstacles. He only had 2 hurdle starts to his name, and I think 3 miles will bring about more improvement. And whilst I'm not in the habit of getting too carried away with my anti-post bets just yet, he's already on a bit of a short list for horses for the Ultima. I think that's perhaps the campaign they'll go. I think he's got plenty more to give. He'll cope with slightly slower ground. So I was really impressed by Peaky Boy in that novice chase. The feature race was the Greatwood Hurdle, and it was sort of deemed as a clash between the 2 best handicapped hurdlers in Britain, Burdett Road and Dysart Enos. Burdett Road got the best of it. He was given a really good and confident ride by Harry Cobden, made all the running. He'd been held up last year in headgear. They dispersed with the headgear, went far more forward, and having had a summer racing in good quality flat races, handicaps on the flat, he's clearly a more rideable sort of horse. He relaxed very nice in front, conserved energy, jumped beautifully, as they very often do for Harry Cobden, and found enough up the hill to win off a mark of 133. Dysart Enos, she was perhaps just a bit too fresh on her first start for quite a layoff. I do wonder whether connections, perhaps in hindsight, regret not trying to get a run into her. But then, of course, perhaps the prevailing quick ground has meant they weren't able to do that. She was just a bit gassy, didn't really race very efficiently. And because Johnny Burt was having to maintain her and not let her race too freely, some of her jumping, I felt, was a little bit scrappy. I don't think that was the winning and losing of the race, but I think she could certainly get closer if she'd have relaxed more, and she might well yet to be able to land a handicap going forward. The eye catcher for me was Florida Dreams. He wrote first-time cheek pieces. He's got his career back on track. He won a little race at the start of this season. I think he's crying out for 2 miles 4, and I wouldn't be at all surprised to see him land a decent pot in handicap company over that trip. Connections afterwards spoke that they're going to have a tilt at the Champion Hurdle, and of course they're entitled to. The Greatwood Hurdle has been a good breeding ground for future champion hurdlers, but he won this off a mark of 133. He won it fairly comfortably, but he didn't win by half the track. I think Champion Hurdle talk is quite fanciful, really, and I'd be very happy to oppose Burdett Road in the Champion Hurdle, with or without Constitution Hill in the lineup. In Ireland, the action was focused around Navan. Blue de Vassy was a really impressive Grade 3 novice hurdle winner over 2 miles. Travelled really well and stayed very strongly from the back of the last. He didn't win a bumper, quite surprisingly, but he's certainly going to take high rank over hurdles. And he's by Cocorico. In my experience, and I've met a few of them, they do tend to be perhaps slightly slow-burning horses, and that's often missed because Cocorico is a French stallion. There's this sort of blanket opinion that French horses are more precocious, but Cocorico tends to get quite good-sized horses. They can then take a little bit longer to come to hand. So I wouldn't necessarily dismiss Blue de Vassy as not being capable of taking high-ranking Grade 1 contests just because he hadn't won a bumper. I think he's looking like quite a smart prospect for Gordon Elliott. The Liz Mullen Hurdle was won by Home by the Lee. He beat Bob Ollinger. Both of those horses very rarely feature on my radar. I think they're a little bit inconsistent. I like horses that are consistent. Home by the Lee had a good pull at the weights from last year. Bob Ollinger looked to get a little bit tired jumping last. Maybe he wasn't quite as tuned up for this year's campaign as he was last year, whereas coming into the Liz Mullen Hurdle last year, it was very much, could they get him back on track? So I don't think they left any stone unturned. Maybe this year they feel a little bit more confident that they've got the old Bob Ollinger back. They can bring him slowly into the season. So I wouldn't read too much into the Liz Mullen Hurdle. It's not a form line I'll get too carried away about. And to be honest, neither Home by the Lee or Bob Ollinger are horses that I overly want to place too much faith in. The beginner's chase was won by Down Memory Lane. He looked really classy. He only had 2 hurdle runs. He was beaten when trying Grade 1 hurdle company last season, but comfortably beaten. But he wasn't seen after that, so I don't think it's beyond the realm to assume that he maybe met with a setback during that race. That might mean that that's not a form line you want to trust. And over fences, he looked very classy indeed, and wouldn't be at all surprised to see him take high rank over fences. My novice Irish hurdler to follow, the Yellow Clay, jumped far better, upped in grade to a Grade 3 contest, dropped back in trip to 2 mile 4, having raced over 2 miles 6 on his hurdle debut. His jumping was far better. He was going a gear quicker, a little bit more aggressively ridden. He made one mistake jumping the second last, but I loved how he jumped straight back on the bridle, travelled up to the leaders, and then powered away up the hill at Navan to win quite cosily, I thought. And then the final race I want to talk about is the 2 mile 4 beginners chase, which featured Slade Steele, winner of last year's Supreme Novices Hurdle, and Better Days Ahead, winner of the Martin Pipe. Better Days Ahead got the best of that duel. I wasn't at all impressed with Slade Steele. His jumping was sound, but he didn't look overly scopy at times. He looked a little bit careful. Maybe he'll step forward for the experience. This was 2 mile 4, which I think should be his trip. He sort of won the Supreme last year from stamina rather than speed. Best Days Ahead, he was better, but I didn't like how he jumped out to his left up the home straight over the last two. Probably two horses that I'm going to look to oppose next time out until they prove me wrong. Before we get into handicap movers and shakers, there's just a couple of talking points, I suppose you could call them, I wanted to get into. The first is the riding form of Sean Bowen. I honestly think he's riding as well as any British-based jockey I've seen, and I'd include AP McCoy, Richard Johnson into that. Just seems to be able to do it all, riding positive from the front, taking his time from the back. Gunsight Ridge came down at the last at Cheltenham in the 2 mile handicap chase. He couldn't really go the gallop down the back straight, and rather than keep pushing and shoving, Sean Bowen had the wherewithal to take a pull, sit up on him coming down the hill, fill his lungs up, and then made a really big, strong run. Came down at the last, and of course, jumping is the name of the game, but I'd have been pretty confident that he would have reeled in Madara to the eventual winner, and that would have certainly been one of the ride of the season contenders. Then on the Buffalo Soldier, conversely, very positive from the front over that 3 mile trip. Got some tremendous jumps out, really strong, and of course it was very sad to see Buffalo Soldier face a heart attack up at the finish line, but it shouldn't take away from what a brilliant performance that was. And then even rolling on into Monday at Leicester, he rode the Wolf, who is probably best described as a bit of a monkey, and kid and cajoled him round Leicester, having virtually refused at the water jump. He was very sympathetic with him, applied the pressure at the right time, thought it was a really intelligent ride. And whilst Harry Cobden is perhaps the stylist and has his way of doing things, I think Sean Bowen is very versatile and honestly is riding out of his skin. And then on Tuesday morning, of course, if like me, you've been keeping abreast of your social media, the big talking story is Constitution Hill and his racecourse gallop at Newbury, which has got some absolutely fearing for the future of the horse. He's going to be retired because he finished a little bit tired after a racecourse gallop on soft ground. I think it was a bit misleading in that at the races actually only put out a clip of his final 2 furlongs, and he did look a little bit tired. He certainly took a good blow and finished slightly behind Sergino, his work companion. But then when you watch the entire gallop back, I think there's nothing to worry about whatsoever. He took a seriously fierce grip all the way down the back straight at Newbury. You could see just by looking at the difference in the body language between Nico de Boinville on Constitution Hill, James Bowen on Sergino. Sergino relaxed on a lovely loopy rein. James Bowen was nice and relaxed in his body posture, whereas Nico de Boinville was pretty rigid, had his feet quite far forward, was clearly having to work quite hard to keep Constitution Hill restrained. And then when they turned into the home straight with 4 furlongs to run, it was very obvious that again, Constitution Hill latched onto the bridle, came alongside Sergino and clearly wanted to go a gear quicker than Nico had desired. And then understandably, coming into the last 2 furlongs, got tired. Yes, he took a good blow. He looked big enough, I thought, in the very brief clip of him walking around the paddock. I wouldn't be alarmed at all. And the other thing I'd point out is that people are very quick to throw stones at Nicky Henderson, but he has been nothing but transparent about this horse since that very poor gallop last year. He's detailed every single thing they've done with the horse, new stable, the wind operation, etc., etc. They seemed happy. They said that he got tired. He's got another piece of work to do. He's got to school yet, and he'll probably have another piece of work. Again, was 10 days away from the fighting fifth. If they're happy, I'm happy, and I would be very happy to take the 13-8 now about the fighting fifth, and indeed the 5-2 about the champion hurdle. I think it's a massive overreaction, as you often get from the racing sector on social media. Constitution Hill, I'm looking forward to him in the fighting fifth, and I really hope he's back to his best. Before we get into handicap movers and shakers, producer Alex, who's pretty keen on the old Cheltenham Festival, has bowled me a googly and wants me to do a little bit of boom or bust on some of the market movers from this weekend. So we'll run through them very quickly. The Arkle, Low de Sud, from about best price around 16-1 is into around 10-1 now for the Arkle. Is that a boom? Is that a bust? I quite like that price, actually. Certainly is an each way angle. You know he's going to go for that race. He's got experience around the course. He jumps soundly. Of course, with the turners out now, it is Arkle or Handicap Company, and I can't see the Skeltons dropping him to Handicap Company. There might be one or two a little bit better than him come the day, but 10 to 1 each way, I thought, made plenty of appeal. Conversely, down memory lane, it's 31 to 1 with SBK. I wouldn't want to go anywhere near that. Whether it's value or not doesn't really matter. You just couldn't be confident with any degree of certainty that the Arkle is where he'll end up. He'll have plenty of entries, plenty of opportunities, plenty of handicap entries as well. So down memory lane, I can happily wait to see where he goes from there. East India Doc, the Triumph Hurdle Trial winner, he's 7 to 1. I think he'll go unbeaten in the UK this year, but you'd be very surprised if some of the expensive French purchases that made their way to Close Sutton aren't going to be a bit better than him come March at Cheltenham, so I could leave that price alone. John Bond, 3 to 1. This is the one I really grappled with. He probably won't be much shorter than that come the day. So from that point of view, there's not much value there. But I do think he's got a great chance of winning the Champion Chase. I've seen plenty of people say that this isn't his track. I couldn't really disagree more. He got beaten by two very good horses in peak form when he's been beaten there. And he then obviously made one very bad mistake when beaten in the Clarence House Chase. He's won the Schlur in impressive fashion. He's won it again this year. I think he's a really solid horse. It does, of course, remain to see. You've seen what Willie Mullins does with his 2 mile division. Al Fabiolo, are they going to bring him back to his best? But 3 to 1, I think that'll be about the price he is come March. So you can probably leave it for now. But I wouldn't dismiss John Bond as a potential Champion Chase winner. And then finally, 2 for the Gallaghers, the 2 mile foal novice hurdle. Potter's Charm into 14 to 1. I'm just not quite convinced that that form is as good as it looked. I'm going to wait till after the Challow. There's looking like a good heat, the Challow hurdle. Mr. Megget, Paul Nicholls has got some pretty lively ones in there as well. So I'll sit on my hands for that price. And the Yellow Clay, my Irish novice hurdle to follow. I'm really happy with what he's done so far. He's 16 to 1 for the Gallaghers. That makes appeal, apart from the fact that I think he'll end up going 3 miles come the festival. So the Yellow Clay is a decent price, but I'd much prefer to see him in the Albert Bartlett come March. Into Handicap Movers and Shakers now, and we'll start with plenty of horses that have gone up in the handicap in the last 7, 8, 9, 10 days, because of course we've got to factor in Sunday and Sandown before, and that's where we'll start, which is Al Rio. Now he's gone up 6 to a mark of 128. He was one that I gave after his return win at Huntingdon, said he would win again, and he duly did. He jumps very, very quickly. He's a strong travelling horse. Again, he went quite violently right over the last fence at Sandown, as he had done at Huntingdon, but he had plenty left in the tank to keep the closers at bay. Up to a mark of 128 now. I still think that mark is workable. He's got to go right-handed, and also his winning form, his 3 wins have come in field sizes of 6, 8 and 6. As he goes up in the handicap, he is, of course, going to have to go into deeper races. That often means bigger fields, and I'd perhaps be a little bit cautious about that. But if Kim Bailey and Matt Nichols, as it will be soon, can find another small field handicap for him, going right-handed over this 2 mile 4 trip, I don't think a mark of 128 accurately reflects the true ability this horse has. Also winning right-handed at Kempton was Ilovethenightlife. Now, she's gone up £3 to a mark of 127. She won over 2 mile 4 at Kempton, only got up in the very shadows of the post. She was a 3 mile 1 furlong winner over hurdles at Plumpton. She got a mark of 130 after that Plumpton win over hurdles and didn't go on, but that also coincided with the Joe Tizard yard slightly dropping out of form in the spring. So wouldn't necessarily be convinced that this mark of 127 is beyond her, particularly given that as she steps up in trip to 3 miles, she'll find more improvement. So she's certainly a horse that's gone into my tracker. I'd be really interested to see her up in trip. Despite this mark of 127, I still think she's potentially nicely handicapped. Another Kim Bailey horse to come to now, and another winner actually from earlier in an earlier episode this series is Hurlerontheditch, again with Kim Bailey. He's gone up £5 now to a mark of 118 after winning at Lingfield over 2 miles 4. You may remember I felt he got a pretty poor ride off Brian Hughes at Wetherby earlier this season. He duly won at Lingfield under a decent ride from Tom Bellamy. Very positive, got to the front, I felt quite comfortably, and then was idling after the last. And I'm also not fully aware that, or don't think Tom Bellamy was fully aware that the closers are coming. He only won by a neck in the end, but I think he had plenty left in the tank. He's up now to a mark of 118, but that is still comfortably below the 122 he was put up to after falling at the last at Warwick on his chase debut last year. His form didn't go on from there, but the form looks solid. He beat Rock in a Storm. Well, he was going to beat Rock in a Storm, who was the eventual winner by 20 lengths. Rock in a Storm is now rated 115. I don't think that Hurlerontheditch is 135 horse, but I do think he's better than this mark of 118, so I'm going to keep following him. This is over 2 miles 4. He'll stay further. He'll stay 3 miles, so keep Hurlerontheditch in your tracker for now. Another winner from an earlier episode, and we're racking them up now, which is pleasing to see, was Jagwar. He won at Bangor under a really canny ride. He was held up, was made to get plenty of experience working in and out of horses over a 2 mile 4 trip. He's gone up £9 now to a mark of 132. I really liked how they educated him through this race. The sharp track potentially was against him, but he still had plenty left in the tank to get to the front fairly comfortably, jumping the last and clear away. He's up in grade now to a mark of 132 is going to be a better race. I think they're going to have to go up in trip as well. He gets away with the 2 mile 4 trip, but he does lack a little bit of tactical pace. And I wouldn't be convinced that the mark of 132 will stop him. He is going to have to improve again, but I think 3 miles can bring about further improvement. Lowry's Bar, he finished second to Jagwar. He was also a horse that I said to keep on side. He's gone up £4, finishing second to a mark of 134. He's becoming slightly disappointing, but I'm just not convinced that Ben Jones is getting the best out of him. He does like to be quite aggressive, Ben, and truthfully, perhaps not a jockey I'm overly keen of. He often makes plenty of use of horses. They can, when it works, it looks very good, but on more than one occasion, I've seen horses that perhaps should have won get tired inside the closing furlong and get chinned on the line. Lowry's Bar, I think, raced too keen through Bangor, didn't have enough cover. Ben Jones went too early. He'll be £5 better off for a 3-length defeat of Jagwar, so on paper, you would fancy him to reverse that form, but I think Jagwar beat him every single time because he's a stronger finisher and was value for far more than the winning margin. So Lowry's Bar, up to a mark of 134 now. It's a horse I really like, but I think he's been poorly campaigned this year, and dare I say it, poorly ridden. So mark of 134, I think, is going to make things very tough for him to get onto the winning trail off that sort of mark. Nicky Henderson has hit a rich vein of form in the last 7 to 10 days. Aston Martini actually didn't add to that winning tally. She was beaten at Bangor when she should have won. She got to the front and then took a really good look at the last hurdle. Jinxed to her left, nearly unseated Nico de Boinville. That threw away the win. She's gone up now to a mark of 123, so that's a rise of £3. But in a novice hurdle form last year, she beat Betty, who's 129 rated. She beat Only by Night, who's a 125 rated horse. And I just loved at Bangor how she travelled through the race. She's clearly got plenty of gears. She jumped very slickly. I think into a better race, she might well be capable of significantly outrunning this mark of 123. I think a better race, they'll travel more strongly. She'll get a nice lead down to the last. She's clearly got a bit of pace. So Aston Martini, perhaps not a nailed-on winner, but I think she's an interesting horse off a mark of 123. Another Nicky Henderson horse, and maybe I need my temperature taken for putting this horse into the mix, is Mr. Coffey. Now, he's up at £3 to a mark of 140, but he actually ran off 142 in the cross-country chase. And whilst his jumping was pretty cold early on, he certainly gave away a few lengths. He seemed to warm to his task. He was ridden with great restraint by Nico de Boinville, but he really warmed into it, jumped very soundly on that last lap, that smaller lap, finished with a real rattle behind the Irish Raider, and finished very strongly. He seemed to enjoy it. He's clearly a quirky horse. He's a long-standing maiden. He's a horse of his ability not to have won a race over fences is slightly bizarre given the excellent yards he's housed with. But I felt that this was a race that could perhaps bring him forward. I think if they look after his mark now, the cross-country races going forward might be where you see him to best effect. And I also reminded of the great performance he put in for about 3/4 of the Grand National 2 years ago. He was very aggressively ridden, seemed to love the forceful nature of that ride. And if Nico de Boinville perhaps repeats that next time out over the cross-country fences, now he's got that experience, I think a mark of 140 makes Mr. Coffey interesting. For all that I know, he's a slightly frustrating horse. A horse I really like and has followed with good success last year in the junior novice hurdle campaign was Wreckless Eric. He probably should have won on his debut for the John Joe O'Neill Yard at Wincanton earlier this month. He came down 2 out when looking to lay down a big challenge, but he atoned for that in really convincing style at Cheltenham. He's gone up £8 to a mark of 125, but I just love the confidence that Keelan Woods showed riding him out the back, bringing him with a late run. I think he got to the front plenty easily enough. and a mark of 125 still looks workable to me. He's a young horse, he's only a 4-year-old. I think he'll progress further still, and he's going to make up into a very nice novice chaser in time. So Wreckless Eric, I think, could probably land another decent pot this season for John Joe O'Neill. I was pleased to see my SBK betting podcast NAP transmission land the odds at Cheltenham on Saturday under Patrick Mullins. I thought he was given a really good ride, very patient ride. Amateur races, they often go a strong gallop from the start, and I thought Patrick Mullins paced it beautifully. I was pretty confident throughout, and then they got to the top of the hill and he briefly got outpaced. But as soon as they turned in, it was always pretty comfortable viewing. He was always going to get there. Stays very strongly. He's up £3 now to a mark of 132. He's a 3-mile 1 hurdle winner on soft ground. So it might be that the soft ground puts a bit more emphasis on stamina, will mean he won't get outpaced at the top of the hill going forward. And I think perhaps these amateur races are the route for him, where they go hard early on. They perhaps come back to him a little bit. I think he enjoys coming past horses. So transmission off a mark of 132. I'm going to keep him on side. He's going to have to improve a little bit more. But of course, going into these amateur races, they could swap out Patrick Mullins, who doesn't claim at all in amateur races, look to get a decent Irish amateur in with a claim. And I think that makes transmission of serious interest. Ridoto won the feature race of the weekend at Cheltenham, the Paddy Power Gold Cup. Won it very convincingly, and he's been duly thumped by the handicapper. He's up £11 now to a mark of 149. He was an SBK selection. I thought he was an absolute standout on the pick of his form. I thought he got to a very attractive mark, and I think given he won so convincingly, he's got a raise, and he's probably got an extra £1 or £2 from the handicapper for slightly making him look a little bit daft. I think that's his winning done now. He was beaten 6 lengths off a mark of 148 over the same course and distance last January. I say no reason at all why a mark of 149 is all of a sudden going to see some improvement. So they've landed their pot. I think they'll now have to focus on getting the handicap mark back down again to perhaps have another go next year. Although it is worth saying that there are some decent claiming conditionals in the Paul Nicholls yard with a bigger claim than the £3 that Freddie Gingill claims. So maybe they'll look to swap jockeys over next time, and that might give them a little bit more of a sneak. But I think Ridoto's winning is done for the time being. Doyen Quest was arguably one of the easiest winners from Cheltenham this weekend. He's gone up £10 to a mark of 135 for bolting up in that 3-mark handicap hurdle. It was his first try at that trip. Plenty of people had latched onto the fact that he'd been a strong finisher over 2 miles 5 previously, and he duly showed that the step up to 3 miles really suited him. He'll be £3 well in now. He holds an entry in the Betfair Stairs hurdle at Haydock next Saturday, so he'd be £3 well in. It was an early frame race, so he'll get a £7 penalty. That £3 well in does make him look an attractive proposition, but of course you've got to factor that in with the fact that it'll be a fairly quick turnaround. But off a mark of 135, I still think Doyen Quest has got more to give. He's fairly lightly raced horse, and I think he's going to take some beating in Haydock next Saturday. Just one horse catching the eye coming down in the handicap, and it's my old friend Fugitif. I was delighted to see him run a really big race for Richard Hobson and Carl Hinchy owners in the Paddy Power Gold Cup on Saturday. Again, he was quite slowly away. It meant he got shuffled back further than was ideal. I spoke to Richard and he said ideally they would like to have been more forward. And it did mean that he had to do quite a lot of running through the mid part of the race, but he still got to a challenging position at the top of the hill. And given how strongly he finished in the December Gold Cup last year, a big run did look on the cards. But perhaps those exertions through the mid part of the race told on this first start of the season. He got to the last, didn't quite run up the hill with his usual gusto, faded into 5th, but he's been dropped now £2 down to a mark of 150, which means he is now below that last winning mark of 151, which came in last year's December Gold Cup. He's a really big horse, so he takes plenty of getting fit. He's bound to improve for this run. So on a nice mark now, and I'm sure wherever he goes next in handicap company, Fugitif is primed to strike. Only one of interest going down in the handicap, but a few of interest staying on their marks. The first that needs mentioning is Champagnesuperover for Ollie Murphy and Beau Morgan. He caught the attention of the stewards when finishing well beaten in the race that was won by Jagwar, featuring Lowry's bar. The stewards considered that Beau Morgan hadn't made ample enough effort, and when you watch it back, he was very tenderly ridden. He stays on a mark of 118. The stewards took exception to the fact that Beau Morgan hadn't declared to the clerk of the scales that there was a respiratory issue, and then mentioned it, they felt, too late in the piece. Be interesting to see now. He raced in a tongue tie. If he has a wind up, it might well mean that a mark of 118 is workable for Champagnesuperover in handicap chases over 2 miles, 4 furlongs. He's not a strong finisher, so a flat track would suit him well. An old favourite of mine, Springwell Bay, stays on a mark of 145. He couldn't cope with Highland over 3 miles at Cheltenham this weekend, but he raced far too freely over that trip. They just didn't go quick enough for him. It meant that John O'Neill Jr. had to do a lot of managing to the fences. That meant he didn't jump with his usual fluidity. He wasn't making lengths at his fences because John O'Neill was having to keep a fairly tight hold of his head. And then that inefficient style of racing meant that when they got to the business end of the race, he didn't have much left in the tank. I think they'll drop him back in trip now to 2 mile 4. He showed plenty of speed when winning at Chepstow over that trip, and he's a strong stayer at that distance, so I can understand why they tried 3 miles, but it's the second time he's disappointed over 3 miles now. I think this is his trip. Mark of 145 still underestimates him, so Springwell Bay remains in my tracker despite perhaps being a little bit disappointing at the weekend. There was plenty of drama at Cheltenham at the weekend, none more so than in the cross-country race when Tommie Beau ran out or perhaps took the wrong course under Michael Nolan. He's got a ban for taking the wrong course. He's going to appeal it. He said to the cameras that the horse cocked its jaw and took him left. I'm not quite so sure. I think he did have a moment where he slightly forgot where he was going, but he was running a really big race. He stays on a mark of 143 and jumped beautifully. He seemed to love the cross-country type of racing. And that just gives me a side note that there's a brilliant piece done on the Jockey Club social media accounts done by Michael Andrews, who puts out some really good content featuring Simon Prout, the owner of Tommie Beau. They had a camera and mic on him whilst the race was running. It's well worth a watch. And if there's any justice in this sport, and we often know there isn't, Tommie Beau will be back to the cross-country race next time. Take the right course, and I think off a mark of 143, he certainly looks competitively handicapped for the cross-country discipline. And then one final non-mover, and if you dismiss everything I say in this episode, please don't dismiss this. I think this is the standout handicap horse of this week, and it's Madara. Finished 4th in the Paddy Power Gold Cup, ran off a mark of 141, and by some miracle stays on a mark of 140. He's not had his mark touched. He was ridden out the back by Tristan Durrell, made huge progress in the closing stage, which we know is hard to do on the old course, far easier to do on the new course. Made really big late progress, jumped very soundly, and crucially, and I think it's been missed from a few people, he raced without his tongue tie that he usually wears, and he also raced without his usual cheek pieces. I think this was a sighter for the December Gold Cup. I wouldn't be at all surprised to see Harry Skelton jump in the saddle, tongue tie go back on, cheek pieces go back on, and off a mark of 140, I think he's looking like he'll go very close in handicap company next time, so be certain to stick him in your tracker. I think the December Gold Cup will be his target. And then just to finish, 2 new entries for this mammoth episode of Handicap Movers and Shakers. The first is Gwennie May Star, enters on a mark of 97 for the Skelton Yard. Finished a moderate 5th last time out at Bangor in a 2 mile novice hurdle. Was given plenty to do, never really put into the race, as has been the theme throughout the previous 2 races as well. I would be very surprised if this horse doesn't step up in distance now. His bumper form, or her bumper form, has got it lined up with a horse that's running to a mark of 114 in Saver, who's already won over hurdles this year. I think this new trip will bring about plenty of improvement now going into handicap company. So Gwennie May Star certainly should go into your tracker. And then just one from Ireland who really caught the eye, and that's the Henry de Bromhead trained Birdie or Bust. Having first start for 250 days, finished in behind down memory lane in that beginner's chase, travelled and jumped beautifully well, just got a little bit tired, wasn't overly hard ridden, stays on a mark of 140. In the colours of JP McManus, you know that these horses are going to be found good handicap opportunities further down the line, so Birdie or Bust should certainly go into your tracker. So that's it for episode 6 of Miller's Movers. Plenty got through this week. Any questions, don't be afraid to put them in the comments section of this video or find me on X and ask me there. I'll be back same time next week where we'll be looking upon other races as the Betfair Chase.